And peace, love, respect. Big King Sadiq hollering at you one more again. All right, folks, we're warming up here, getting ready to start things. All right, we're getting the energy up, folks. We're feeling it on the quantum level, right? Just maybe another minute, folks. Wanted to make sure we get things warmed up and started in good timing. We've got just a few seconds here, and I'll be coming in with the opening. All right. Worldwide movement. Peace, love, respect. Big King Sadiq hollering at you one more again. All right, man, folks. AGD. Another great day. True indeed. A beautiful day with plenty of opportunities to spread peace, love, respect. Magnificent. All right, of course, I am your host, Big King Sadiq, hollering at you one more again for another episode in the podcast Building with Big King. All right, folks, this is the podcast where we set the foundation, where we make sure that we lay out the building bricks for us to firm up and cement in the foundation of this new paradigm, one that we like to say exudes peace, love, respect. Indeed. All right, folks, another episode of Building with Big King. We got a few things that we're going to go ahead and warm up and talk about as we are entering yet another phase of this interesting ascension, this magnificent awakening time, this time of true discovery, right? Of true uncovering of so much for so many. Forward. We got one direction to go, and that's forward. Indeed. All right, folks. So, first, I do want to thank you truly for helping me to build the worldwide movement. Peace, love, respect. I love you all and appreciate you all tremendously for all of the love, the support, the inspiration, right? Man, we are surging powerfully forward. And we are continuing every day to make real progress in spiritual maturation, both on an individual and a collective level, right? All right, folks. So as we move forward, I want to make sure that we are really taking into appreciation and account exactly where we are collectively. Individually, that's something that we have to continually gauge, right? Uh, Knowing, learning, and understanding more and more about ourselves as we continue on this path of spiritual maturation, right? Um, so I don't want to be remiss and always express my gratitude, right, to everyone who helps to continue to build the worldwide movement. Peace, love, respect. True indeed. Um, and always everyone who is contributing in their own unique and individual way to continue blazing this trail, surging powerfully forward individually and collectively in this ascension process, gaining in spiritual maturation each and every day, each moment of every day. For each moment brings us new experience from which we can continue to glean and learn a great deal. indeed. So I thank you for joining me yet again on another episode of Building with Big King, where we discuss and break down some very important issues, often also spanning and covering recent events, right? Recent news stories. We make sure that we try and cover as much of the gambit of what we have to be aware of each and every day. Is that is a huge function of the worldwide movement. Peace, love, respect is to spread awareness, right? Especially in these days and times with so much going on, so much true and drastic change in the world. Not that change is a bad thing. Change is the only true constant. It is how we deal with change and how we process the changes that come across us in each and every day of our lives that is the true determination factor, right? So again, I thank you all for joining me for another episode of Building with Big King. And in this episode, we're going to cover a few very interesting topics and some topics that I would say are paramount in importance and relativity to the changes that we find ourselves amidst right now, right? In this phase, in this portion, this part, this leg of our extension path, we find quite a bit of change, again, both individually and collectively, right? All right. So first of all, I do want to thank you all again for joining me. And please do make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. All three of those things vital to continue to grow the worldwide movement, peace, love, respect. So please make sure that you do like, share, and subscribe. All those things very important. Um, of course, it is through my creative works that I continue to grow the worldwide movement, peace, love, respect. Um, my YouTube channel, a little over 750 videos, right? In the library of videos. Also, my first podcast, this podcast, Built with Big King, the first two seasons, and I have just begun the third season. Also, my musical album, PLR New Paradigm, both on the YouTube channel and most of the streaming platforms, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, etc. Um, like I said, I just began the third season of this new season of Built with Big King, but I also have a podcast on my rumble.com channel, Conspiracy Theories or Hidden Truth. Let's talk about it. We completed the first season for that, went 25 weeks, as well as everything else I have a link to on my YouTube channel. Two books currently available on Amazon in paperback and ebook form. The first of which I have also converted, or rather, um, uh, converted into an audiobook, which is also available uh, and is now a part of the Library of Congress as an audiobook through the Library of Accessible Media. So all of that stuff, I said more than a mouthful. All of that goes to build the worldwide movement, peace, love, respect, and to continue make sure that we are growing awareness in that way. All right, folks. So getting right into today's issues or subjects, should I say, the first topic is something that really took me aback a little bit. Not that I was completely shocked or astonished, but it took me back just a bit into the breadth of what it did actually mean. It really hit me quickly that this next invention, I guess it's an invention, an advancement, the AI book reader. Okay, so just to go over this, cover this quickly. We're talking about essentially a tool where You scan a book, right? A written or a print book, a book that is in print. Um, and instead of the person sitting down and reading a book like we're all, or many of us, are accustomed to, you scan the book, and then this AI agent actually reads the book for you and actually essentially reads it to you audibly for you to listen to. So it wasn't that it was necessarily an audio book that was, converted over from a written book to an audio book by someone who narrated it. Instead, we're actually just talking about an average book that you would find in print that you scan just the cover with, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, that's how it functions. You just scan the cover of it, and then AI will read that book back to you. Now, on the surface, that appears to be an incredibly convenient invention, right? Man, I don't even have to read the book. I could just scan it, take a picture of it, and AI is going to read it back to me and do the reading for me. How convenient, right? But think about the implications of that for a moment. Okay. So, reading is a manner of processing information. Um, Typically, information that would have been contained in print form, some form of print, right? Or if not in print, even if it was in digital media format, um, it's still something that you would have to actually read to process, right? You actually have to go through the process of reading it and digesting the information. Instead, now with these AI readers, you're simply sitting back. It is the AI that is doing the reading and the processing of the information of whatever book is contained in therein. So you never really read the book. And as far as you actually know, you could be processing any information or reading anything, or maybe not reading anything at all. If we are literally going to turn over our own personal reading to artificial intelligence, then are we truly processing that information? Are we truly digesting and learning what it is to be learned? Are we truly experiencing? You know how you read a book and you can find yourself immersed in the story of the book, right? Do we ever get to that point? If AI is reading the book to us? No, dare I say, because we actually don't even know. I mean, as the reader, you're not the reader. It takes away the position of being the reader. You're just the consumer. Think about that to get the difference. You're no longer the reading that is educating themselves and informing themselves with the information contained in with whatever text it was they were reading. But instead of reading anymore, now they're just consuming a product. Think about that. Think about that at right this moment, the important juncture that signifies. The juncture between creative reliance on human intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence. Think about that. I'm all for responsible application and development of artificial intelligence, but it's got to be responsible. well thought out, and to the benefit of humanity individually and on the collective level. Think about that. All right. As we go ahead and move into the second topic, and I must say again that is something to me that's a bit gripping. Again, just the notion of the information that I'm taking into my brain that I'm going to mentally process, and it will shape my intellect. Do I want it to be something that is first processed by artificial intelligence rather than something that is interpreted by my own human intellect and discernment? Indeed, we're keeping our eye on that development, and we will be taking note of any developments along those lines and all of the implications of artificial intelligence, um, implications that we can likely rest assured will be growing in number. All right, moving into the next story, not the next story, but rather the next topic. Um, and that's getting to talk a bit about this movie Disclosure Day, which I happened to recently go and see. I thought it was the opening day here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when I went to go see it, but it may not have been. Um, Regardless, or rather, regarding that, regarding that, um, I went the other day to go and see the movie, thinking actually that it was opening night. So I don't know if it was or not. Regardless, I did see the movie Disclosure Day. Now, what was my take on it? What did I get from the movie? What did I think about the movie overall? And what do I think was its impact or significance? Well, that's probably a layered answer or a layered response that I should offer for that, because there are a lot of layers of importance and significance revolving around this movie. Now, the first thing that somebody, or at least that I took into account and take into account in reference to this movie, and in reference to an individual that may be viewing this movie, for the first time, obviously. Um, why do I mention that? Because I believe that for each individual watching that movie, it's a little different. What do you mean, Big King? Okay. What I mean by that is, based on where you are in your awakening experience, that movie will impact you likely much differently, right? What do you mean by that? Okay, so someone who is, and I know people in many of these categories, right? When we're talking about ascension path, or how far along someone is in their ascension or on their path of spiritual maturation, the things that they are going to be shocked by, that they may already have previous awareness of, or things that they are able to cope with in their established sort of bag of coping mechanisms, will vary and differ greatly. All right. I, for myself, for example, I'm an individual who has actually spent close to the past 30 years or so. Let's see, how old am I? 23. Oh, easily the past 30 years, maybe close to 35 years. Putting in some level of research into the quote unquote UFO phenomena. So just even without my spiritual awakening, and the two things are completely separate, just in that alone, there are you can imagine how much I've learned on the subject in well over 30 years of studying it. And I'm not exaggerating, folks. I've literally studied this subject for over 30 years. I remember it was about um, maybe 28, 29 years ago at a certain job I was working at. Uh, a gentleman I ended up becoming friends with started bringing me these tapes. We started discussing different things. We felt each other out. I think we even played chess at work one day or something, because I was at a job that we had a fairly relaxed environment. And I think we were playing chess one day and having a conversation. And some of the things we talked about must have gave this gentleman an inclination as to the openness of my mind on a variety of topics. And I guess one of which was the UFO slash alien um, subject. And because he noticed, my inclination toward this subject, he started bringing me these VHS tapes, right? Now, each tape had anywhere from, and I remember in total, it took a while for him. He didn't give them all to me at once. He gave them to me maybe one at a time or two at a time, mostly one at a time, because I remember there were at least four or so different instances in which he brought me new tapes. But each tape had between like 2 and 8 hours worth of like documentary information and information that he compiled, videos that he compiled on the subject. So he kept feeding me these tapes and giving them to me, and I'm checking them out. And each one, to me at the time, I'm looking at, and it was absolutely captivating, the information. And I mean, I had some sort of loose idea of what was what on the subject. But probably 80 to 85%, maybe even close to 90% of what he was revealing to me, I had never had any exposure to in my life, right? Other than some childhood experiences that I had long dismissed and pushed back sort of in my psyche, right? I mean, this is how it happens, folks, right? Because what I'm referring to is back when I was probably about 14 or so, I had my first sighting. Um, First encounter, in fact. It was not just a sighting of a craft, it was an encounter, an interaction with the occupants of a craft. But that's a whole nother story. The bottom line is that, especially at that age, once you've cited it or spewed that out to enough people, and they talk to you like, yeah, yeah, right, and they blow you off, or worse, I guess, you know, in terms of ridicule or whatever, at some point you just say, all right, forget about it. I ain't telling nobody else about it again. And you yourself begin to forget about it. You literally push it in the back of your mind like, oh, well, if they're going to treat it like, oh, well, it's no big deal, I guess I'm also treating it that way, right? So long story short is I had some prior knowledge to that, but these tapes were blowing me out of the water with the information that was contained therein. So having a 30-year history of that alone made me incredibly well prepared for whatever was going to be contained in this movie. Um, and as I thought, much of probably about 98% to 99% of what I saw in the movie, I was already aware of. Which is why I can say about the movie that, again, it depends on where you're at. Myself having all that wealth of information on the subject, again, very understandable that I wouldn't be shocked by anything that I saw in the movie. But I had to stop and, as I often do, have to stop and take into account everybody is not at the same point at all. Many people are are so much in a different place in their own spiritual maturation. Again, I am one who is of the believing and actually of the knowing that everyone on the planet to some degree is experiencing this ascension, right? There's not someone who's walking around with an energetic bubble around them that is preventing them 100% from not being impacted by these profound energies in the entire area of the galaxy that we find ourselves in during this particular stage of our solar system's orbit around the center of the galaxy. There's nobody who's actually exempt to that. Okay. Now, there may be people, particularly there are people who are aligning themselves, taking part in or supporting transhumanism that are making themselves a lot less receptible and certainly a million times, and I'm just putting together a number to get my emphasis across, a million times more less capable of processing that energy beneficially for themselves and naturally as they would if they weren't engaged in sort of the technocrat movement, right? Um, but again, no judgment. They are where they're at. Um, but the point is, where someone is in their ascension path will vary greatly. And along with that great variance, there is a great deal of variance on what will actually shock you or what you may have never had. I mean, if someone, I watched the movie from a perspective of someone who had a wealth of over 30 years of experience on the subject to draw on. There was not going to be anything in the movie that shocked me. But I again had to take myself to the perspective of someone, let's say, who hasn't had any exposure to the subject and has always sort of just poo-pooed it away as science fiction and lunacy, right? To now have not only this, and the reason why this movie and the timing of this movie, folks, I would say is such a big deal, is because it coincides with the US government releasing so much information that is pretty much right along the lines of everything that you watched in the movie, right? or at least a lot of it, not everything, but a lot of it. Um, so that's what makes it like incredibly relevant and such a big deal. Otherwise, it could be poo-pooed and just laughed off as just another science fiction movie. But in today's world, with what Congress has made available to the public, which with what is available in so many different multimedia forms to the public, to what is available online, to what is available in information passed and relayed from one another these days, right? All of that compiled together gives us a picture and a scope that is very broad, from individuals who have no exposure whatsoever to this subject to those that have a great deal of exposure to this subject, and with the added layer that the government, the United States government, which, by the way, folks, they're actually sort of just following suit of other major governments. There are many other world governments that are much further along in this disclosure process and have, like France, for example, has an actual working relationship with the public dealing with this phenomenon, a way and a means in which to process reporting of sightings, of interactions, of different happenings and events. And the government is no longer just hoarding all that information and acting like, this doesn't exist and you're crazy if you start looking into UFOs and aliens. Instead, they are just one government, there are a couple of others, that is actually opening up very freely and openly to their citizens or to the public. The United States is beginning to walk down that corridor, okay? But is nowhere near as far along as some other governments. But where they have gotten to at this point, to be to the point where they're starting to really come clean, right? And some of this has to do with the fact that there are many within the actual government who don't even know a lot of this, right? But the fact that they are becoming educated and they are relaying things to the people, and as they are even being educated, the public is as well, right? So all of this coinciding together, that movie and what is being released to the public, is really framed a much different scope and environment around this movie than would normally be. As I said, if this were 15 years ago, it could be just pretty much written off as another sci-fi movie. 15, 20 years ago, if you go back 20, 25 years ago, it would definitely be just taken as that, right? But given what we now know to not just be science fiction, but to actually be reality on this planet, we have to look at it completely differently. It almost takes on the scope of a documentary rather than just a movie for entertainment, right? Disclosure Day is more than just the title of the movie. It is an era that we're living in, and we're rather now at the beginning of a new era of public information and awareness on this subject, right? So much now has become undeniable that previously, and I'm talking about just again 15, 20 years ago, could easily be laughed off. Those same individuals can't laugh it off anymore, right? Again, when you have the United States government in these congressional hearings revealing more and more, and again, it's just the tip of the iceberg. They themselves even say, the Pentagon just had a big release of files, and they just said that there's a whole nother batch that they're about to release soon. So I'm just trying to paint the picture and get you to grasp the environment, right? Um, so that is why the movie itself is such a big deal. But again, that doesn't take away the the caveat and the variable that many of the people who are watching this movie, not many of the people, everyone who's watching this movie is at a different point of their own personal ascension. And based on that point in within their own personal ascension will give you the varying degrees by which people are able to accept, deal with, and process that movie. I don't think it was made, and I actually applaud Spielberg in that. It was not made in a way that things were revealed in a frightening way or a way that would cause or inspire panic in any way. They did a good job in that. I think they did a really good job in not doing what I was, and I think many others were a little bit. And thank you all for chiming in, by the way. Please invite some other folks because we need to talk about this and understand this subject as intricately and thoroughly as possible. But you know, a lot of people had the thought, and I thought that the possibility was certainly there that this movie could be used as a psyop to just create and stir up fear in people of an alien invasion or some alien takeover agenda. Um, so I thought it did a great job in steering away from that, um, and instead embraced the truth of the matter, which is that it's more about true civilization, folks. I keep throughout my platform echoing the sentiment that all the warlike tendencies that we have displayed previously as a species is what is preventing us from actually being able to truly consider ourselves a civilization, right? One of the founding requisites, or I would say one of the requisites or the founding principles of being a civilization is that you grow out of self-destructive tendencies. You are civilized enough. You know, don't we catch on to that? What do we always say? Be civil to one another, right? So the warlike tendencies and all that is not civilized. But as we continue to march our way out of those tendencies to true civilization, to evolve into a space where collectively we are much further along in our collective ascension, right? The ascension of humanity, and we are progressing, folks. I know the drama makes you feel like we're not, but we are drastically. There are so many more people on the planet, in particular in this country, right, that don't have the same blind faith that they sort of had in leadership that has irresponsibly um, sequestered information that should never have been hidden from the masses, in my estimation, but that have so vehemently done so, right? That people don't just take what they're told so easily anymore and just accept it and run with it and live their lives based on it. Now people do research. Now people do free thinking, independent research. Now people ask questions. People ask the most important question of all, which is why, right? Um, and they do so at a rate and in with a certain level of being vehement and earnest and a certain willingness to hold accountable those very same leaders that they would ask these questions of. The world is different, folks. And that's just, again, the change that if one notices, just look around your neighborhood. Don't look to the news or some multimedia outlet to tell you how far the ascension is going worldwide. Look around your neighborhood, talk to people, have questions, notice that people are talking about things that are that are a lot different than what they used to talk about, right? At the water cooler, at bus stops, people are having conversations about things that I can tell you for a fact 30 years ago was not commonplace. So all of these things are barometers that we can use to gauge where the level or how far the ascension has actually gone. But again, the point I was really trying to stress there is that each individual who went to go see this movie is going to process it a little bit differently based on where they are on their own personal ascension or spiritual maturation path, right? And the things that they have been made aware of, the things that they've learned and been exposed to along the way on that path will vary greatly in how people process this movie and other things that are to come. Folks, I'm telling you, this was just sort of the opening of the gateway, or however you want to put it, right? This is just the beginning. There's going to be an avalanche of more stuff coming, both from governmental channels. You know, like I said, the Pentagon said that they have more files they're about to release very soon. Okay. Um, and through things that people will discover on their own and things that will become made aware online. But most jarringly, the things that we will be witnessing, right? That's where I guess my prediction sort of comes in. I don't want to, I'm not one to really label what I say along the lines of prediction, right? But if you want to call it that, I would say that in the next 3 to 9 months in particular, we are going to witness some things that are going to be life changing in terms of each individual's level of perception, especially along the lines of this subject matter: UFO, UAP, extraterrestrial, extra dimensional beings, um, portals, energetic changes and shifts within humanity. All of that is a vast and expanding topic that people are going to more and more be confronted with because of all the things that fall into that category that we're going to actually be witnessing. One of the things that people always fall back on is, well, if I don't see it with my own two eyes, I can't believe it. Well, folks, there's about to be some things that even with your own two eyes that actually don't see much, they really don't when you talk about with the entirety of the electromagnetic spectrum. Our eyes currently really don't perceive much, right? Um, like literally, there are institutes that have done study after study after study on this subject matter, and your physical eyes only process a very small percentage of what is right in front of them of the electromagnetic spectrum. That's just fact. Animals like dogs, for example, process a whole lot more. Um, but anyway, there are going to be things coming up that we will see, witness, and have to process that are within the scope of the subject matter that a lot of people that could be very shocking and jarring. So there was an aspect of that movie where they talked about, and I felt like they did a decent job of talking about the impact of this information on quote unquote society, right? How does it affect and change the paradigm? For people who, how does it affect religion? Was a um, major aspect that they covered in the movie. It's a movie. It's one movie, folks. You can't cover the entirety information wise in one movie. But the way they touched on it, I felt was fairly profound, and they did a good job with that. They talked about how it would impact social structures and institutions that touch and affect our everyday lives, right? That's real, right? That's the kind of stuff that the government and the quote unquote powers that be have been weighing for a little bit now. And that's just based on what they know. They're just now, again, probably 80% of the government right now is just becoming privy to much of this in the same time frame as many of you. Again, like I said, I'm an individual who happens to have been studying this subject matter for over 30 years. But most people haven't, you know what I mean? Like, and that's understandable. I could dig that. All while I was studying it, I wasn't looking at other people like, y'all some knuckleheads for not having any information on ufology, right? I understand that it was a friend's thing for me to be studying, but that didn't diminish my curiosity or drive to do so. But anyway, for the average individual, there are some things now that I put myself in that perspective and that I look at it as someone who hasn't had so much exposure to this subject matter. There may be some things in the movie that are a little bit like probably difficult for them to accept, right? So there's that. Now, having said all what the movie did cover, and I didn't get on to everything they covered. I mean, of course not, folks. It's a movie. I want you to go and see the movie, right? But excuse me. But now that we sort of talked at least a little bit about what the movie did cover, I will go a little bit into what it didn't cover. Understandably so, because again, I view this as sort of a tip of the iceberg thing. And I didn't like the way they left off the movie at first, but given everything that I'm saying right now, just thinking about it and revisiting the way the movie ended, I have to be all right with it because there's so much more. And it left off sort of in that way, like, okay, we gave you the tip of the iceberg. You sitting down now? You paying attention? You ready? Okay, now listen. And that's literally, I think, the last word they said. And I just gave up something I wasn't. Hopefully, people aren't watching this before they've seen the movie. Okay. Anyway, the bottom line is people will be a little bit different. Now, there are some people who are so, and folks, don't take this as a negative judgment because it's not. But there are so many people who are so far back or so far behind in grasping this subject matter that you could show them, it doesn't matter, 80 documentaries, you could start bringing them physical evidence until they have like an extraterrestrial individual or extra dimensional individual actually interact with them. They're not believing any of it, period, because it's too upsetting to them. Quite frankly, it upsets their paradigm too much. And that's understandable. Again, the impact on an individual's religious perspective alone, that's probably the segment of society that there's the most concern over, right? Because there are many aspects of popular religions that don't prepare people to deal for such a reality. Now, I do see that there's a shift, there's a change within religion. And I even hear a lot of religious leaders amongst different religions, Christianity, Islam, etc., who are starting to deal with this subject matter more and more because, folks, the cat is out of the bag. And again, there's so much more that we're about to have to deal with collectively that people in just about every institution and every walk of life are going to have to broach this subject matter and discuss it in a responsible way, right? In a way that doesn't incite panic, but a way that is more educational and preparatory. Because that's what we need to be doing, educating and preparing people, at least in my estimation. But they didn't talk about some very important things. Like they didn't talk about, um, well, they showed you a little bit. They did show you a little bit of how the corporate world is interwoven with the shadow government world. Okay. And how the cabal wields influence over the shadow government elements in major governments around the world, it, including the US. Okay. If you paid attention while watching that movie, and again, I'm trying not to give too much, but there was a scene fairly early on in the movie where they showed you sort of the pecking order. And all right, hopefully I'm not giving away too much, but there was a scene where this corporate individual clearly had a clearance level and a position that was held in such esteem that he was basically talking down to military generals, um, FBI directors, and assistant directors, whatever, like they were complete peons. Like, okay, what he tell the guy, stay in your lane or something like that, right? So it just does go to show you how this thing has evolved and where it's at right now. It did do a decent job of showing you that the corporate world is heavily immersed. And I'm talking about the major corporations, not the mid-level or small corporations. I'm talking about your Lockheed Martins, your uh, uh, I'm not even gonna start just naming it. Anyway, the bottom line is the major corporations in the world um, have some division or aspect within those corporations, many of them, that have clearances and are interwoven into all this at a level that is higher than some of the highest ranking individuals in our military. And that's the case around the world. That's the setup of it, right? And I think the movie touched on that, at least for those couple of little scenes or quick references. They did touch on that, but they certainly didn't paint the clear picture of what it actually is, right? And to what degree it is. I mean, in Congress, we've had, uh, I believe, 4-star, if I'm not mistaken, 4-star generals in these public congressional hearings on the subject speak about how they were denied access to certain quote unquote black sites or certain installations or facilities that they felt like they've got the highest security in the land, so there's no way or anywhere they shouldn't have access to. But they were denied access. They were in fact told that they don't have a high enough clearance level, which did not ring well because they were supposed to have had the highest clearing level in the land. That illustrates the real severity of how far along this thing has gone over the past 7-8 decades, where this um, shadow or shadowy government element has risen to the point where they operate above and beyond the federal government. It's already bad enough that the corporate world is so heavily represented as much more greatly represented than the people of the country. Unfortunately, that's already a big enough problem that the government, as it is not representative of the people's will enough. But beyond that, there's the fact that there's a whole nother level or layer above the supposed representative federal government. So there's that. They touched on that a little bit, but they didn't really, they didn't have the time to. That's understandable, to really delve into that. They didn't get into the fact that they did talk about the fact that shadow government element has had well over 7 decades to retro engineer these craft, to develop offshoot technologies based on what they uncovered and learned about the craft's propulsion systems and other aspects of the crafts. What they've learned from their interrogations of the occupants and or pilots of these crafts. A great deal of things that they have learned and developed over the past 70 years. They touched on that. They touched on it. But they didn't get into the fact, the nefarious uses of those technologies. They didn't talk at all about how a lot of that has been applied, right, to some incredibly nefarious, dastardly, and incredibly illegal activities, like the fact that because of them having such a long time and no oversight and virtually unlimited budget, right? So over 70 years, unchecked to do this, with no oversight, no hindrances, not even a pause to wait for congressional approval, for funding. None of that stuff. Unlimited funding, all of that has yielded what could be considered to some people, monstrosity that rests above the government that most people believe is the highest authority in the land. So that is something that they touched on. But again, they didn't get into that or the activities and how with that much time and opportunity to develop, they actually developed their own fleet of craft that compared to the craft that they down have gotten closer and closer. Actually, this concept was glazed over a little bit in the second Independence Day movie. Okay, remember how they talked a little bit about how because they had the crafts that the first wave of alien attackers came in, that they were able to retro engineer, refit, and alter their own craft. They took jets from being just what we would typically think of as a jet. They essentially turned their jets into spacecraft. So, they had lasers, and I believe they may have even had shielding similar to what the alien craft had. But the bottom line is they showed you a little bit of the retro engineering process and what the effect of that would be. So what they didn't talk about in this movie was that with that fleet, they have engaged in incredible atrocities and crimes against humanity. They have taken part heavily in the human trafficking rings. But before I even go there, I need to state that probably 85 to 90% of the abductions that have been carried out, I think those are accurate figures. I would say refer back to Dr. Stephen Greer for accuracy on those figures, right, or more accurate assessments. But generally, in generalization, I'm in the ballpark that much um, is left out about the involvement in these abductions. Like a lot of times, or most of the time, when people thought they were being abducted by aliens following a completely alien agenda, in reality, what it was the shadow government craft under the control of the shadow government and this cabal, um, the occupants and actors, if you might want to say that, or individuals or the participants in these abductions were either human beings, shadow government operatives, dressed in what would be very believable costuming to appear as an extraterrestrial, or actual, or no, excuse me, or okay, or actual extraterrestrials working in conjunction with these shadow government individuals, or three, biological, technical biological hybrids, meaning that they would have. So think, if they've advanced that far in technologies, think about the biological technologies and how far along they must be. They essentially have robots that are not clunky metallic robots. These are organic robots, okay, that would resemble and bear extreme likeness to the actual extraterrestrial biological entities. I believe they're referred to as ebons. But um and folks, that's a bombshell that's going to be coming out with more development. I know a lot of people are going to hear that and say, man, now this dude is saying UFO abductions are related to or actually conducted by, yeah, most of them are conducted by craft that are controlled and operated by human beings that are a part of this cabal or shadow government elements. Okay. Beyond the abductions, they've committed mass abductions, most notably in third world countries, and have had a instrumental impact on and part that they played in the stage of world human trafficking. Also, believe it or not, drug trafficking. Think about the immense funding. If you want to ask the question, why in the world would they be involved with drug trafficking? Think about the immense funding. Okay. Not to mention other elements of the overall agenda. Um, they didn't get into the experiments conducted. Remember, I started talking about the biological advancements. Well, a lot of that is um, at the cost of or through the usage of experimenting on human beings, many times forcefully. This is the reality of it, folks. You heard that term before, reality can be stranger than fiction. Yeah, that's accurate. So there was a lot that they didn't talk about in the movie, and I'm even not mentioning everything, of course, right now. There's just too much to mention in one sitting. So even though there were a lot of those things that they didn't mention or talk about, what they did mention and talk about, I felt like they did a much better job of uh, than I had anticipated. Again, I'm operating under the caveat that there's just only so much they can cover in one movie. Um, so with all that into account, I'll and again, probably the most important aspect, because again, this is about educating and preparing the masses. Probably again, the most important aspect is the varying degrees of the individual's readiness to accept and process this information amongst or correlated with the actual viewers of this movie. So, taking all of that into account, um, I do think it is very worthwhile. And I wasn't disappointed along those lines. All right. We are a long ways into this process, folks. We're now getting to the point where we're starting to be, you know, uh, getting into not measuring it through months and years, but now decades into it. We're starting to move into that area. Just starting to, I'm saying. It hasn't been decades, but we're getting there with where we are. And along with that, we have come a long way and we are far into the quote unquote disclosure process. So all of that, I say, coincides with the overall paradigm shift, one that we are so vehemently attempting to steer, not attempting, that we are bit by bit, more and more every day, steering in the direction of and cementing in the new high vibrational frequency paradigm, rooted in, founded in the principles of peace, love, respect for all. That's where we're headed. Not to World War III, not to a dystopian nightmare where the elites continue to dominate and rule the planet and do so even more overtly. No, none of those things. We're moving, we're surging powerfully forward toward the true civilization and evolution of humanity. Welcome to the worldwide movement. Peace, love, respect. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Buildin with Big King. I love you all. I thank you all. Please like, share, subscribe. Very important. Please support the worldwide movement, buy my books and music, check out my videos and podcasts and everything, lectures, interviews, all toward growing the worldwide movement. Peace, love, respect. If you want to make a donation to grow the movement, it's very much needed and appreciated. Please do so. It's very much needed and very much appreciated. I love you all. You can make your if you do want to help that way and make a donation, there's a link right on my YouTube channel, which is Big King Sadiq. That's my YouTube channel, obviously. But there's a link right there on the channel. If you notice, it says 7 more links, right? Just click on that and there's a drop down. The very last one, I believe, is my Cash App, and that's where you can make any donations. So I thank you all. I love you all. And we're doing it, man. We're surging powerfully forward establishing this new paradigm. One again that we like to say is founded, rooted in the principles of peace, love, respect. Of course, I'm your host, Big King Sadiq, for this episode of Building with Big King. I'm out.